Another COP, another controversy as the world struggles to meet climate goals. We're supposed to limit global warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees and reach net zero emissions. But with COP29 underway in Baku, are world leaders facing the threat of total failure in a frighteningly warmer world? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is climate change. More than 100 world leaders have gathered in Azerbaijan looking to resolve our planet's unfolding climate crisis. But every year of COP summits tragically underscores the fact that greenhouse gas emissions, believed to be the cause of global warming, have continued to rise. A transition to clean energy has been slow in coming, so this year in Baku, the stress is on financing the most at-risk, poorer countries to make that transition. But will any drafted framework be enforceable, especially if a climate skeptic runs the world's biggest polluter? Here's a look now at some of the science.
The science is simple and clear, and has been for almost 100 years. Higher levels of carbon dioxide and methane in our atmosphere mean higher temperatures on Earth. It's not speculation, it is basic cause and effect. The theory dates back to 1896, when Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius first identified the connection. It was later substantiated by Guy Callendar in 1938. And since then, the data has only grown clearer.
When do we want it? Now! Climate first!
Yet millions continue to deny it, even high-profile figures.
So Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay?
The oil industry knew about climate change long before most of the world. Exxon, more widely known as Esso, for example, conducted cutting-edge climate research as far back as 1977. Their models, eerily accurate to this day, predicted the warming.
Exxon knew!
Yet for 2 decades, the company allegedly spent millions undermining the very science they helped uncover. Now, Exxon faces 86 lawsuits, which could cost it billions if it loses. Earth's climate has always changed. Ice ages came and went, and temperatures have fluctuated. But these shifts took thousands, even tens of thousands of years. Now, we are witnessing a rapid transformation in just 200 years, driven by human activity. This rapid warming is creating a world we may struggle to recognize. The latest report from the IPCC warns of a temperature rise of at least 3 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. And this is no longer just a matter of numbers. It's about rising seas, more extreme weather events, and ecological collapse, scenarios previously reserved for dystopian fiction. Yes, we've made strides in renewable energy. The UK, for example, shut its last coal-fired plant just last month. But transitioning away from fossil fuels isn't just about electricity. It's about rethinking transport, agriculture, construction, and even aviation. And these are the real challenges. The outlook is so dire that on average climate scientists have far fewer children than the general population as a response to the fear of what the world may look like for future generations. A world where the negative impacts are already beginning to unfold.
We must help people understand the danger they're in. We must help people imagine these volumes of water running through their streets and into their homes. Just telling people that it's going to rain quite a lot is not good enough. People don't understand what to do. They don't have the information they need to keep themselves and their families safe.
This week, world leaders are convening in Baku, Azerbaijan for the COP29 conference. But unlike past summits, there is no parade of familiar faces. The heads of the world's biggest carbon-emitting countries, China, the United States and India, are noticeably absent. The real focus is the debate over climate finance, how rich nations will help the poorest countries transition away from fossil fuels and cope with the damages climate change is causing.
If at least 2/3 of the world's nations cannot afford to cut emissions quickly, then every nation pays a brutal price. If nations can't build resilience into supply chains, the entire global economy will be brought to its knees.
The science is clear, and the time to act is now. But will they? That question will define the future of the planet and every life on it.
So, from toxic smog in Pakistan to catastrophic flooding in Spain, can the world curb the worst effects of global warming in time? And are COP summits the best way to do that? Joining me now to debate that and more are from Baku, the founder of Climate Depot and former U.S. Republican Party political aide, Marc Morano. From Manchester, spokesperson for Just Stop Oil and former principal scientist at Shell, Dr. Grahame Buss. And also from the Azerbaijani capital, global engagement director at the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, Harjeet Singh. Thanks all so much for being with me. Marc, I have to start with you and ask why you're actually there in Baku as someone who doesn't really believe in the science being applied at COP29. So what are you and others like you trying to achieve there?
Chaos. Well, actually, this is my 20th out of 23rd 21st out of 23rd UN summit I've been to, starting with the Earth Summit in Johannesburg, South Africa, 2022. Been to almost every COP except one or two in that 20-some years. And the reason I come as an observer with the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow and my group, we are climate skeptics. I worked in the United States Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. I come here to find out what the latest is and I report back home. I've been doing interviews, I'm doing podcasts, I'm doing writing, I'm doing videos from here. And our message has basically been this whole process of COP, Conference of Parties, which was started under a Republican president, George H.W. Bush, and we opposed it back in 1992, needs to come to an end. The idea that any UN commitment agreement from the Paris Accords leading to net zero is going to impact the weather is absurd, unscientific. The idea that we face the climate crisis is unscientific. And my message, specifically why I'm here, is I'm here to preach the news that Donald Trump is bailing the United States out of this process, and it's glorious. No more UN Paris Agreement, no net zero, and we are pulling the U.S. out, and we're hoping European and Western nations join us in this big exit.
Okay. Let me ask you, though, Marc, do you think the extreme weather we're seeing on the planet, I mean, do you think it's okay? Should we do anything to mitigate it, including the dire health effects that it's having on countless people now around the world?
Okay, extreme weather, even the United Nations, the IPCC reports admit extreme weather and hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, droughts are either no trend or declining trend on 30, 50, 100-year time scales. There is no there when you're talking. You can always find a record broken somewhere. I liken it to a lottery. Your chance of winning the lottery is very low. The chance someone somewhere winning the lottery is very high. So anyone in the media, any climate activist can always say, oh, there's a record flood there, there's a record tornado there, there's a record hurricane. It's nonsense. If you look at it on a global scale, there is no there. Even the United States National Climate Assessment admits that, and this was a report on the Biden administration. So extreme weather is being weaponized for propaganda purposes. And yes, we should do things about extreme weather. We've already done a lot of it. We've already had a 90-some% death rate of the last 100 years because of better early warning, better infrastructure, and wealth and development, which helps countries fight the effects of bad weather.
Okay. I mean, Grahame, how do you fight such a passionate stance? I'd like to say it's on the margins, but now that Trump is in charge of the world's biggest polluter, it's something you're going to have to face directly. And I have to mention that last year, it was said that having people, representing the oil lobby, for example, at the COP28 summit, was like inviting weapons dealers to a peace conference. So, I don't know, does Marc represent that now at COP29?
One of the reasons why the COP hasn't been as successful as it should be is because of people like Marc. He and the oil industry have hijacked the process. And that's one of the reasons why it's not making further progress. But can I just make a statement here about, I worked for an oil company. I worked for Shell. for a significant part of my career. I worked with people up to board level, and the oil and gas industry knows full well what's happening. They know that the temperature is rising because of burning of fossil fuels. That's why they're there. They're there to slow down the rate of change. They're there to slow down the transition. They know this is true. After all, look at Shell and Qatar are investing massively in carbon capture and storage. They know that the climate crisis is real, and they may not want to say that externally, and in fact they use people like Mark, they pay Mark to muddy the waters. But the truth is, the reality is that the industry knows this is true. And I've spoken to two chairmen of Shell, and both of them said that the climate crisis is worse than the median IPCC case. Now, I also spoke to head of strategy in Shell a couple of years ago, and he made it very clear that there are two drivers for the oil industry. The first is the survival of the oil industry, and the second is profit. He also said that Shell wants to be last man standing, and that's what's really going on with this. This is because the oil industry have nowhere else to go. The only way they can go is to continue the oil and gas sector. Other areas can move out of it, but the oil and gas industry can't. They have no choice.
So, Harjeet, let me come to you then, because COP29 is underway, whether people think it's useful or not. So do you still believe meeting climate goals like 1.5 degrees is even possible, even though every single G20 country has missed its targets really since these summits almost began?
Well, there is no doubt that we have been lagging behind, and I would like to support Graham what he just said, that it's because of the fossil fuel lobby that has been existing in this space for decades now, and people like Mark who have actually not allowed the real progress to be made. And imagine they're saying that they're going to reverse it even more. But I must say this is the place where we are going to achieve progress, because that's where we have all 190 countries coming as one community. We have each country playing its role, but we know that developed countries have not fulfilled their responsibility. They have not supported developing countries in meeting their obligations, and that's why emissions continue to rise than the target that we were supposed to meet, and especially now bringing it down at the rate of 7% by 2030 so that we can halve the emissions compared to 2019 levels. So we can still do it. The latest UNEP emissions gap report very clearly told us that no doubt there's an urgency. We have been lagging behind. We need to really step up, and the emissions have to go down dramatically. And for that, finance becomes extremely important. And there is no place other than this UN Climate Change Secretariat where we can actually have these conversations. And that's why we are here. So despite all the frustration, despite all the delay that has been caused by climate skeptics and fossil fuel lobby, we have to make sure that COP29 becomes a success.
Okay, Graham, just quickly, I need to come back to you and ask if you can match Harjeet's optimism there. Do you really think we can meet those goals? Because from what you've said, if oil lobbies and companies are not participating and trying to up their game here to meet these targets, none of this is really worthy.
I think the COP process is worth continuing. One of the reasons why is just that it's one of those few periods when it gets talked about a lot in the media, but it's definitely not living up to the expectations of, say, Paris 2015, when the expectation was that we would halve our emissions by 2030, and yet they've gone up. They're still going up. 40 gigatons a year of CO2 going into the atmosphere. That's going to be there for 100, 200 years. That's there for a very long time. It will continue to heat our planet, and it will continue to result in the destruction of so much that matters to us. And any other position is just stupid. It's just denial. The science is absolutely rock solid, clear on this issue. And I wish the COP the very best of luck. But I have to say, at the moment, it's looking bleak.
Okay. Mark, I know you believe, the science really doesn't indicate what, the other analyses will say and the action that needs to be taken, but you at least have to admit that it's pretty disturbing how quickly, policy can change and just do an entire flip-flop. There was so much celebration, when the Paris Climate Accord was actually completed, only to have Trump throw it out the window, and he will again just a few years later. And then we had, Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro undo measures to protect the Amazon, and now deforestation has actually dropped again to the lowest level in almost a decade in Brazil. So, how can anything really get done if leaders can't be held accountable? Does that just play more to your point that these conferences are useless, in your opinion?
Yes, it does. Even if the politicians are earnest, and there's probably very few that actually are, but even if they are, they go back to their home country and they face all other sorts of objections, all other kinds of difficulties with the public in the United States with this election of Donald Trump. Everyone kept talking about the climate youth vote. Well, guess what? It turned out that young people, by about a split margin, were supporting Donald Trump. There was no, in America at least, in this past presidential election, there was no climate youth vote. And so what's happened is with the Senate going Republican, the Senate and the House going Republican, the idea that anyone in America is going to politically, or our leadership class is pushing net zero, isn't happening. And now you're going to have a domino effect because Europe's not going to follow it. And I just need to take one moment to make a point. I'm not getting oil money. I'm not an oil lobbyist. I've never been a lobbyist in my life. I loathe the oil companies. ExxonMobil just said that Donald Trump should not pull out of the Paris Agreement. I did not like Rex Tillerson, who was the Secretary of State in the first term. I don't like any of these greenwashing energy companies that do all the virtue signaling. They're excited about this COP29, all the oil companies, because they get to join the carbon markets. This is the finance carbon. This is a way that Greta Thunberg said it best. You won't find Greta Thunberg here. She said these COP processes were a scam meant for greenwashing the entire industry. Now, I may not agree with her on her perspective, but I do agree with her about what these COP process represents. This is belongs in the dustbin of history here.
Okay, Harjeet, I'll let you respond to that. Go ahead.
Absolutely, Mark. You cannot pick and choose. I must tell you. First of all, you have to tell us which page of the IPCC report that you are referring to and rejecting the science. Science is very clear how carbon dioxide, how methane, they cause climate crisis. I don't even want to debate with you on that because that debate is absolutely settled, right? Second, we know, and I totally agree with Graham, this space has not been effective because of people like you operating in this space. The reality is, the problem is not with the space, the problem is with those rich countries and then lobbies who have not allowed this space to operate and be more effective. And that's exactly what we need to change. And when you talk about young voters, and that's the problem with the US, because you have not educated your people. And it's because of people like you and companies like yours who are trying to promote a very different narrative. And you should understand the kind of injustice you are doing to this generation and beyond, because you are not looking at how people are dying and how many people are getting affected. They're losing their homes and livelihoods because the United States and many of those companies want to continue to burn and extract fossil fuels. And that's a direct connection between extracting fossil fuels and deaths and destruction that we are seeing all around. And you can't deny that.
There is nothing to deny. We've always had extreme weather. We've had 99% drop in climate deaths in 100 years. These are facts. We are better able to handle whatever weather Mother Nature throws at us. The idea that we're in some kind of unprecedented climate crisis is pure fiction. The idea that all scientists agree. I just spent time.
That's the reality.
I can't hear. But I spent time with Nobel Prize winning physicist Dr. John Clauser, won the 2022 Nobel Prize, was invited to the White House. He just declared himself a skeptic, full article in the Washington Post. The scientists are not supporting this. This is a propaganda campaign. The United Nations Climate Panel formed.
I don't know. You pick up one or two and you try and justify the skepticism that you bring in. You cannot justify that. We know the kind of interest that you're trying to protect. You're totally ignoring the hurricanes, Helen and Milton, that you have seen and the destruction they have caused. You are ignoring how billions of dollars are being lost because of this inaction and denial. And as Graham said, fossil fuel industry knew it 50 years ago exactly, and their predictions are becoming true. So how can you deny that? How can you deny the destruction that we are seeing all around?
Let me, yeah, I want to get Grahame back into the discussion there, because Grahame, if there's maybe an easier way to argue this, if we just even ignore the science, altogether and say, let's just curb climate change in the interest of public health, it's win-win. We all know, regardless of whether you think the science proves that climate change is man-made, by curbing carbon emissions, everyone sees a net benefit just in health. If we're looking at the toxic smog in Pakistan right now, we know that's from burning fossil fuels in large part, as well as just traffic. So why is it so hard to sell that to a public like the United States, for example?
Well, the first point to make, of course, is that the only credible explanation for the rise in temperature, for the destruction of the natural world that we're seeing now through temperature rise, through extreme weather that we're seeing, which is not natural. It's made by us burning fossil fuels. The only way to explain that is through the burning of fossil fuels. That's an absolute no-brainer. And anybody who denies that, they're either very, very ignorant, or they've got an agenda which is not about preserving a future for our children and presumably just about making money. Now, look, but let's look at the insurance industry. The insurance industry knows this is happening. In large parts of America, you can't insure your home for flooding now. In California, you can't insure your home for fire. Look what happened at Jasper in Canada. Half the town burnt down. Now, large parts of Canada, the forests are dying because it's warming, or the trees are burning in forest fires. And it's the same is true in Europe too. In the UK, we're seeing a drop in our crop yields, about 20% drop in our crop yields, because farmers can't plant because it's raining all the time. We're seeing the temperature goes up and it's raining more. And one of the consequences of heating the temperature is that you get more storms. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So any argument to say that is simply not credible. And it's disgraceful that someone like Mark, I noticed that he wouldn't take a bet on the climate change. He wouldn't take a bet. He was offered twice to take a bet, and he wouldn't do it. Now, the actuaries aren't saying that it's nothing going on. The actuaries are saying that, you know what actuaries are? They look at risk. The risk, they're saying, is going up and up and up, and it's going to cost vast amounts of money. And adaptation, which is the one thing that Mark is referring to, adaptation is much, much more expensive than mitigation. And mitigation means not burning fossil fuels. We have to stop burning fossil fuels, or we are going to destroy our children's future. And it's as simple as that. Okay.
Mark, I know you disagree, but we're down to our last few minutes, and I want to look at the potential upside, if I can call it that, to what's just happened in the United States. Because if we look at the United States now, we know Trump couldn't care less about climate change, but ironically, he's backed by Elon Musk, who's actually a fan of green technology and has invested pretty heavily in it, and, of course, electric cars. I mean, could that potentially lead the Trump administration in a different direction, even if strictly in the interest of profit?
Are you asking me that? I mean, I would say absolutely. Elon Musk could be an influence. It's a complicated story with Elon Musk. A large part of his wealth is generated from the climate fears, which then led to the gas-powered car restrictions and the EV mandates and the tax credits and all the government corporate collusion between automakers. So he could absolutely have an impact on Trump, although Elon Musk himself has backed away from the climate alarmism. 5-10 years ago, he would have fit right in here at COP29. But Elon Musk has altered his language. I think COVID and COVID lockdowns changed his opinion of that. I just want to say that, he said something about the children. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are the greatest liberator of mankind in the history of our planet. The idea that we're going to restrict energy, food production, and transportation, our freedom of movement, in order for a net zero fantasy, That's the greatest threat to our
Mark,
children.
I just need you to explain, though,
down.
net zero aside, how do you feel that there's any win for the use of fossil fuels? Again, just knowing what the health implications are.
Okay, you made a very good point about that. If you guys actually sold just the health implications and air quality, you mentioned Bangladesh, you have China, you have the developing world. But here's what you're missing. The developed world, the United States, according to the World Health Organization, is among the cleanest air in the world. Since our first Earth Day in 1970, we radically improved air quality, water quality. At the same time, we have massive economic growth, massive population growth. We can do that. If you're just talking about air quality, you can do it. China, the developing world, when they get past a certain arch, they'll be able to clean up their environments. They're in such a heavy phase of industrialization. It's like the U.S. in the 1900. We had filthy air and water, and I mean, even beyond that, but I'm saying that was the peak. So I think a lot of this has to do with you get past a certain stage of development where you can then improve technologically. It doesn't mean you leave fossil fuels, though.
Okay.
And it doesn't mean you submit to this net zero agenda.
Graham, quick final words.
Look, it's statistical, isn't it? There's risk, and risk is probability times consequence. You might argue that the risk is low, but the risk is sufficiently high for us to be very, very worried indeed. And that's why, even if you just deal with it on a technical, statistical basis, we have to address this issue because the risk is so enormous. We're currently heading for at least 2 degrees C, possibly 2.5, and some people saying 3, and we could be even higher than that. There is a credible probability of that because of burning fossil fuels, and any other position is insane.
Harjeet, 30 seconds.
Well, absolutely. Mark is totally ignoring the extraction of fossil fuels and the problems around it. When you extract it, when you transport it, when you burn it, and we are actually destroying the planet by continuing the use of fossil fuels. And when you talk about developing countries and who are going to be, getting cleaner, I think we need to understand that they need to get finance for that. And the fossil fuel use that developed countries have used for 150 years, that have caused the problem. And by denying the use of fossil fuels and the connection with climate change, you're also denying the responsibility of providing finance. So we know the larger game being played here, but this is a very dangerous game that's being played, which is going to affect and ruin our children's future.
That will unfortunately have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. We are completely out of time, but I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.